Hi, my name is David Peterson. I'm the creator of the Dothraki language for HBO's Game of Thrones and the alien language and culture consultant for Sci-Fi's Defiance, and you're listening to Genretainment.
And here are your hosts, Marks and Julie.
Hello everyone, welcome to Genretainment. This is your co-host Marks, joined as always with
co-host Julie. Genretainment is where we talk about what's happening in the world of books, film, TV, and tabletop role-playing games. We give you interviews with writers, game designers, directors, producers, and actors in both independent and not-so-independent creations.
On this episode, we're chatting with Dr. Christine Schreyer. She is an associate professor of anthropology at the University of British Columbia and teaches courses in linguistic, anthropology, and Indigenous language revitalization. But she's also a professional language creator, creating constructed languages commonly called Conlang. We've had a few guests on in the past speaking about Conlang, so we were excited to chat with her.
She has worked with the Na'vi speech community, which is the language many of you have heard from the Avatar movies. She created the Kryptonian language in Man of Steel, the Eltarian language in the 2017 Power Rangers movie, the Beama language or Cro-Magnon from the movie Alpha, the Atlantean language from Zack Snyder's Justice League movie, and more recently, multiple languages for the Rebel Moon movies and faerie language from the new Spiderwick Chronicles TV show.
It's a fun discussion about constructed languages and language revitalization.
Now, before we start the interview, we want to remind everyone about Cabot Crossing's Kickstarter for the newest anthologies in the Crossing Genres Anthology Collection. This time, we put a twist on fairy tales, folklore, and fables with enchanted tales and twisted lore, Fairy Tales, Folklore, and Fables Reimagined, Volume 1, and Once Upon a Twisted Time, Fairy Tales, Folklore, and Fables Reimagined, Volume 2.
Yeah, that Kickstarter is going really well. Probably at the time you hear this, we got at least 15 more days or so to go if you listen to it on the first day. We also want to mention that we have all sorts of fun stuff happening on our Cabot Crossing YouTube channel. You can hear these episodes there in addition to our traditional podcast platforms like Spotify, plus lots of other fun stuff like Genre Play and more.
Now, if you want more Genretainment, then you can let us know by joining our new Patreon. The link is in the show description. There you can get bonus content.
And if Patreon just isn't for you, please consider sharing, liking, rating, and subscribing to our shows. All of those things will help them grow. And I think that's about covers it. I think so, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now let's get to our interview with language creator Christine Schreyer. Hi, Christine. Welcome to Genretainment.
Thanks for having me.
So for those listening who may not have heard our past interviews with other Conlang experts like Britton Watkins, David J. Peterson, can you explain what Conlang is?
Yeah, sure. So conlang is the practice of making up new languages. It comes from constructed language and then ing. So conlanging. And people have been doing it for many, many years, and it's become more popular with entertainment. So television shows, movies, and yeah, that's kind of how I have been involved in constructed language making.
Great.
How did you get involved with linguistic anthropology? And were you always interested in created languages, or is that something that just developed over time?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to be an anthropologist when I was 12, and I was very interested in Indigenous peoples and languages and cultures. I grew up in Manitoba, and when I got to university, I learned that there were 4 fields to anthropology, including linguistic anthropology. And I always liked languages and learning them. I'm Canadian, so I grew up learning French, though my spoken French is not great, although I can read and understand French. And then I learned Cree at university, an Indigenous language, and Latin. And so I became really interested in that portion of anthropology. And my academic work has been more with Indigenous language communities, trying to revitalize their endangered languages.
Right. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And so I when I first got my job, I'm a associate professor of anthropology at UBC Okanagan in Kelowna. And when I first got my job, when I was teaching the introduction class to linguistic anthropology, one of the assignments I give my students is to make languages over the course of the term. So as they learn about sounds of language, then they pick sounds for a language. And when they learn how words get put together, then they put words together. And so that was how I got interested in constructed languages. And around the same time, that was in 2009, Avatar came out. And of course, Na'vi was a huge constructed language that many people started learning. And I got really interested in these news stories that were saying there were thousands of people learning Na'vi, which maybe Britton talked about when he was here. And that's how I then ended up doing research about people who learn constructed languages, which then led me to get invitations to do my own constructed languages.
That's wonderful. I saw something on PBS a couple years ago about, I don't know which native nation it was, but on the East Coast in the US here, there was a woman who was a member of that nation, and she started working with a linguist, and
Yeah,
they actually revived their
yeah,
language,
yes,
and were able to construct words that they didn't have based on, knowledge of the rest of the language and neighboring nations.
right.
And she said that her daughter, when she had her daughter, she actually used that as her daughter's first language. And parents are learning this language so they can teach them to their children. And it's actually a success story about a native language that is being revived.
Yeah, that
And
I
I was just moved to tears because it
I
was just so.
I love that movie. I showed in my class all the time. That's Jessie Little Doe Bard, who is, oh, what is the name of the language? It's on Martha's Vineyard, Wampanoag. It's called Wampanoag, and it was one of the
Okay.
ones, like the first pilgrims when they arrived, learned that. So they have written records that go all the way back to the 16th, like 1600s, actually. So yeah, I love that movie. I agree, it's really good. Great
Oh,
success
it
story.
was, yes. I mean, I literally was moved to tears watching it because it was
Yeah.
just such a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, I am too. Every time I watch it in class, I warn my students, I'm like, I'm gonna cry at a certain part in this film. You are welcome to as well. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's
Mhm.
so wonderful that you know that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was going to talk a little more about it later, but since we're talking about the indigenous language revitalization, tell us a little bit more about the work you've done with that. Or what are some of the languages you've been working with?
Yeah, so for my PhD, I worked with a Cree language community, and I've learned Cree at two different universities, which is also known as Nehiawewin. And I worked on developing storybooks for the Cree community. I've also worked with Tlingit, or also known as Tlingit, which is in Alaska, the Yukon, and northern BC. And I worked on developing a language board game, as well as place names reclamation with that community. I've been working with them for almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years in 2025. And then I also work in Papua New Guinea. So in Papua New Guinea, I work with a language group called the Kala speakers. I don't know if you know, but Papua New Guinea has the most languages in the world. There are 862 languages in Papua New Guinea
Oh,
out of our 7,100 in the
Oh
world.
my gosh.
Yeah, so almost every other village has a different language. So the Kala speakers, there's about 2,200 of them, and they are in 6 villages in the Morabay province. And they were an oral language, but they wanted to be able to read and write their language and teach it in school. So I went, and with my colleague John Wagner, we helped them decide on the alphabet for their their language based on the sounds, and then have helped to develop dictionaries and grammars and documenting more of the language because it was
Oh,
previously undocumented.
hey, that's
wow.
like what Sequoia did for the Cherokee language.
Yeah, exactly. Mhm.
Yeah, as soon as he created that, they started having, newspapers written in Cherokee
Yeah.
and books and things. And I always thought that was really wonderful.
Yeah, and they did end up using the Roman alphabet. So because there was a rule at the time, a language policy in Papua New Guinea that kids could go to school in their mother tongue for the first 3 years, and then they would have to bridge into English. So the official language of education in Papua New Guinea is English, and so that was why they kept the same letters, although modified
Ah,
symbols. Yeah.
Hmm,
that's
interesting.
interesting.
Hmm.
Wow. Okay. Well, okay. Back to fictional languages.
Sure.
Sorry.
The two are very connected for me. That's how I got here. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
suspect
I'm good at,
some of that will probably come up whenever you create your conlang, which is maybe in the
yeah,
background of it. Maybe not. But
but I'm good at
uh,
getting us off track. So,
no, I think it's fascinating. We had to cover that. So you've worked on a lot of languages for movies like Man of Steel, Zack Snyder's Justice League, the 2017 movie Power Rangers, and more recently the Rebel Moon movies and the TV show The Spiderwick Chronicles. I believe it's on Roku. We noticed a lot of Zack Snyder there. Are you like his go-to expert now? for Conlang.
Yeah, I think that's how I describe myself now. Definitely Zack Snyder's go-to conlanger. Yeah, and I love that. I love working with
Yeah.
Zack. Zack is full of world building and nerdy ideas. So if I'm geeking out about like details on the language, he's right there with me, very excited and enthusiastic. And I've worked with other directors who have a lot of notes, and it's rare that Zack will give me notes on how to change things. Like he's very supportive in that way. So yeah, I worked with him on Man of Steel, and then also I don't credit it, but Batman versus Superman, it was still Kryptonian. So the costume changed. I don't know if you're DC fans, but in Batman versus Superman, the shield changes to have more writing throughout the background of the
Mhm.
S, which is in Man of Steel, it's the word for hope, which is Malor in Kryptonian. And so I worked on Batman and Superman with Zack, and then Justice League, but Zack Snyder's Justice League. And I made Atlantean, or Aquaman's language, although it was not Aquaman speaking, it was Queen Mira, which was Amber Heard. And then on to Rebel Moon. So yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you developed the Imperium writing system for Rebel Moon and how that might have been a different challenge from the Samandrate, Chiron, and Velt languages?
Yeah, so Imperium is the English language, and I worked with graphic designers and a cultural specialist named Adam Foreman, who has worked on Rebel Moon developing some of the world building background information. I don't know how Adam and Zach met. I've never actually asked, but Adam has been brought in as kind of a cultural world builder specialist. And he had been designing like the background of what the history of the Imperium would be. And it was you see an older version of that writing system that's been used on some of the props as well. It's thinner. And then in these meetings with graphic designers and font creators, including Louis Mantia and Clint Schultz was the graphic designer, we discussed like how that could represent English. And so Adam had this very set idea of how many symbols there should be. So then I used that to match to the English phonetics. So when I helped design Imperium, it was supposed to be a phonetic English alphabet. So, like, for example, Q, we have the letter Q, but it's not, it's like Qua, right? It's KW. So we
Mhm.
don't need
Yeah.
Q, so we got rid of Q. Same with X. We didn't need X, so we got rid of that. And so we can write them just with the sounds. But as things tend to go, it had a life of its own afterwards. So they would send me lists of things they wanted translated. And I think you've said you've seen Rebel Moon, but there's
Mhm.
so much Imperium on the sets. And so if you look in the background, there's graffiti and every label, and all of this is written in Imperium. So I would get huge lists of things that I would have to type out phonetically. So if it said bottle, there's two T's in bottle, but we wouldn't write that phonetically. We would just do one. So all of that is phonetic in the actual sets, and then people used it later on for promotional materials, not in that way. So you will
Huh.
see in the guide to the world, like there's the word for the bird. I forget what the word is actually. I'd have to look it up, but it's got two N's in it. What is it called? No, a Bennu. Yeah, Bennu is the name of the big bird that Tarak speaks to in Samandrate, and in that writing of the word Bennu in Imperium, it has two N's, which wouldn't have happened if I'd been using it. So, yeah, that's how I worked to help develop Imperium.
Great. And what about the other languages? I'm not sure which ones go with what culture off the top of my head.
Yeah. So Samandrate is Tarak's language.
Mhm.
So that is what he speaks to the big black bird when he is being freed from the slave trader.
Mhm.
And so he's from that planet of Samandrate. And then Chiron is spoken by Korra to King Leviticus, which is the like tentacly king creature. And that's his language of Chiron. Yeah, and then Velt is where Korra has been living with Gunnar, and it's the one they're trying to protect from the Imperium. So that's more
Mhm.
of the runic symbols. You see some of the symbols in the film whenever you're seeing Velt celebrations and things, but we didn't have spoken Velt in the films. But there is a possibility for that in the future.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Did you pull from any other cultures to help build some of
Oh, yeah.
those languages, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I should have mentioned that as well. So when I met with Zach this time, he has learned from experience that when actors are familiar with sounds, it goes a little more smoothly. And so for Sam and Dre, I
Yeah.
was working with Stas Nair, who is the actor who plays Tarek. and he speaks Russian, Spanish, and Portuguese. And so I drew on the sounds of those languages so that it would be something that he was familiar with producing. And then the sentence structure was also based similarly to Portuguese, as well as there was a gender system. So not masculine and feminine, but similar ideas about sea and sky, which were tied to gender. So I try not to do masculine, feminine genders. I try to do things like animate or inanimate, which are things like Indigenous languages do. And so they are marked similarly with like O at the end for sky words, and C words are marked at the end with U sounds, actually. Yeah. And then for Sharon, that was based on Cora, who was played by Sofia Boutella, who speaks French and Algerian Arabic. And so those were the sound systems that I developed and drew on again. And then I used the sentence structure of Arabic. So it's verb, subject, object. So sat, I, the chair, something like that. And then again, had these different gendered, similar to the French, but they were with a different kind of structure. So the nouns were old, high, ancient warrior, or that was one gender set, or new, low, future debater, which was the other gender. So I like to play with genders in these, although they act similarly to masculine, feminine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Velt written, like the rune symbols, or is that, were you inspired by like Norse ruins or anything else?
Exactly. Yes, Norse Ruins. And again, it was work with Adam Foreman and graphic designer Clint, and then Louis Mantia, who developed the fonts for that. And he's got a really great blog post about all of the fonts. He developed more in post-production for other planets, and some of them aren't tied to spoken languages, although they could be in the future, but similar kind of ideas about fonts and language. And for those ones, because Velt is the farming society, we marked them with harvest was the feminine gender and seeding was masculine. So yeah, very similar to the ideas. And they would be marked in the writing system with these little symbols to mark harvest or seeding.
Interesting.
Yeah. I got really into genders, apparently. I hadn't realized that theme across until I talked about them all together.
Yeah, I like two things I've never really heard that much about before is like how you're using gender and playing around with it with different cultures and stuff, and then also how you adjusted the creation of languages based on the actors, which makes total sense because it makes it way easier for them to learn it.
Yeah, and as far as I know, people hadn't done like that was pretty innovative. Like I've worked on a few shows, like when I worked on Alpha, which is a story about the domestication of wolves into dogs. That was all based on like early human language, and the actors were so diverse. They were Polish and Icelandic and Australian and Chilean, and I couldn't have pulled on everybody, but the fact that it was kind of with Rebel Moon, it's one character from each world and builds on that. So Sharon was built for Sofia Boutella, but also the actor who plays King Leviticus, I can't remember his name right now. It's Tony something, and I can't remember his last name. He also spoke Italian. So the French Romance languages really worked for him as well. So that was kind of cool also.
Yeah.
Very cool. I wonder, I'm putting you on a spot. You might not be able to do it on spot because I completely understand. But if there's like one word from each of those languages that you know off the top of your head,
or a phrase or something,
like hello or a phrase or something, could you maybe say them? Like, I'm just curious, like the sounds, how they sound different.
Yeah. Actually, I thought you might ask me that, so I have things up. Okay, so for Salmon Drite, when Tarek is speaking to the bird, he says, actually, in the hot tip I have for people when they're watching Rebel Moon is if you want to understand the different languages, you have to have the subtitles on. Zack does not automatically subtitle the scenes with languages. Same with Zack Snyder's Justice League. You need the subtitles on to know what they're saying because he doesn't subtitle, which is a very interesting choice because some people want to have the subtitles there, but he doesn't.
Yes, it drives me crazy when there aren't, because I find languages so interesting. I love to.
Yeah, and you can learn them that way, right? So
yeah.
Give me 1 second. I had salmon dried up. Okay, so I'm not going to hurt you. I don't like being in these chains any more than you do. So that would be Gidanye de e tsi vie, aziditsi pro you say gieta azidivie. So that's a little bit of that language.
Wow.
Nice.
And then Sharon, King Leviticus says, your patience is appreciated, and I can assure you that Devra is aware of your presence. And that's the brother and sister who are being hosted on this planet, and so they're waiting to meet them. And so that sounds like Pajida Mraya Reiske Nizikadi Reiti Shelayu Devra Dani Reis.
Nice. They sound different. I can't tell you how they sound different, but they do sound different.
Well, that's good. This one has longer vowels, and I am not fluent in any of these languages and had not practiced them, so they probably could be a little more fluent. And I'm sure the actors were saying them more fluently on set because we worked really hard with them.
That can't be easy learning those.
Yeah. Do you know what was interesting too with Rebel Moon was that every actor that I worked with, no, maybe not, but definitely Stas Nair, who played Tarek, he played a Dothraki in Game of Thrones. So he had already spoken Dothraki. And Sophia Boutella had played an alien in Star Trek where she spoke a conlang as well. So both of them were like, oh yeah, no problem. I've done this before. So it's this new thing where actors have had that experience, more of them, adding that to their resume. Yeah. And then on Spiderwick, Allie, who plays one of the fairies, she had spoken Mandarin in a different show, and so was very confident with speaking the Spiderwick languages.
Can you say something in Velt?
Velt we didn't actually.
Yeah, that was just written down, right?
It was just written, yeah. So I didn't actually
that's right.
make any word. Oh, you know what? I do have a sample word list. Yeah, actually, okay, so I could do seed and harvest. So seed was ri and harvest was sa. Gather is vena. Wheat is suracha. Plow is tani. So I had a list of words we were making, but we didn't get very far with them.
Yeah.
And they were more like harvesty kind of base words.
Yeah, it's really tough for actors because not only they have to learn how to pronounce it, but then the best actors who do it have to like, you got to be careful not to be like, I talk exactly the same. That, you know, you got to emphasize words.
Like a robot while doing it.
Yeah, and I tend to, like, when I record, you will, if you ever saw the like documents, the syllables to emphasize are highlighted in yellow. So this I learned working on Alpha. So the entire film, I don't know if you've seen Alpha, but the entire film is in this made up origins of human language that I developed.
Is it like Cro-Magnon or something?
It is, yeah, Cro-Magnon, yeah. We call it Beama, which means to speak. We all speak, and it's this early human version. And so, like, I had to make sure, like, they're hunting bison early on, and so the word for bison is dura bira, and I had to make sure people weren't going dura bira, like, so that everybody says the same, syllable emphasized the same way. So I highlight that. And then when I record, I kind of try to act while I'm recording, like how I might be emoting, so they can draw on kind of emphasis and tone. But they take it their own places for sure. Yeah, it's always fun to see what they do with it.
Nice.
Now, I'm going to probably mispronounce this, but could you tell us a little bit how you created the Trilantis Pigeon and Trilantis faerie language from Spiderwick Chronicles? Did I say that right?
Yeah, kind of close. So it's Trilantis. Yeah. So this one was my first fairy language, and it was interesting because the twins speak first, and that's the first scene, and that was what they asked me to develop first, was the twin talk. And so there is this idea that twins have cryptophagia, I think is what it's called, when twins, and this is seen in many different areas and cultures, where twins develop a language amongst themselves.
Right. I've heard of that.
Yeah. And then when they go to school or like later on, people tell them to stop speaking twin. And so in this, the idea is that they had been exposed to the fairy language. And so their twin language is based on that. But yeah, they wanted it. I think we developed the word pigeon later on because I also, when I'm in Papua New Guinea, there's a pigeon language there. And a pigeon is when two languages or more are brought together to be used for a specific purpose, like trade. And so in Papua New Guinea, it's English and other New Guinea languages, and it's called Tok Pigeon. And I'm fluent in that. So when I'm in Papua New Guinea, that's what I speak in more than anything else, except for the language I'm working in. And so I knew that, and because they wanted it to be simplified, which pigeons are, and have this fairy portion, but partially English, then we came up with this idea of pigeon. So it's the sentence structure is, for the Pigeon, it's English sentence structure with words that sound like English, but there are also faerie words for some of the things embedded in. So we've developed that mixed language of English and the faerie language. And then later on, they had the Spiderwick's Fairy Guide. And the book, and they developed this beautiful writing system. Actually, I just got reconnected with the artist yesterday, the graphic designer named Nim. I forget Nim's last name, but he was the one who helped design what that would look like. Again, kind of similar to ruins and trees and nature. And so then they wanted pages translated in full faerie. So then I had to develop a second language that had all of this grammatical structure for the full faerie language. And so that one is verb, subject, object, but the verbs are marked with the subject. And as I always write a document about each language. So it says, subject pronouns are often optional rather than obligatory, since the creatures of faerie have been trying to hide themselves, and this has spread to their language where they avoid direct reference to subjects. So I do things like that where I take into account the aspects of the culture. I also say in here, adjectives are extremely important to describe the rich faerie world, and they come before nouns. Time is also not marked in verbs. There is no tense beyond the present tense because fairies live in the present. Tense is indicated through context words, so you have to figure it out through the context. Yeah, so all of these details, and then the grammatical system had to kind of match what the Pigeon was doing too. So it seemed likely that they were connected to each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Did you say anything about masculine, feminine? Is that
No, not on this one. No, there were no genders
okay?
happening here. I could give you a little set of the Pigeon as well as some fairy if
That'd be
you'd
great.
like.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So the first lines in the twin Pigeon you hear are, "You stole the gum," and then that's Simon, and then Jared says, "No, you stole the gum. I planted it on you and made that idiot think I took it. Benefit of being a twin." So now you know the English, so try to hear the English when I say it. So first line, "You stole the gum." "U stole dretelbea." And dretelbea is gum, but it means spruce pitch, actually, because that's what fairies would use for gum. And then Jared says, "No, you stole the gum." So, "Na u stole dretelbea." "I planted it on you and made that idiot think I took it." Benefit of being a twin. "I planted et en u and make it et. Make hatel thingen I take it et. Benefi'i o being twin ila." Could you hear the
I can
English
hear
in
the
it?
English in there. Yeah.
Yeah, especially
Uh-huh.
that last part.
Yeah. Right.
And the planted too. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So the fairy words were more gum, dretelbea, and idiot, mekatel. Yeah.
Nice.
And then the
The
fairy.
fairy.
Yeah. I have so much written fairy, but there's also a scene where the fairy Allie, I forget Allie's character's name actually. It's been Calliope. Sorry, took me a minute. Too many characters on my brain right now. She speaks full fairy at the end. Let me just find her words, which are like a speech to the other fairies to step up and help. Yeah, so she says, "We have to bridge the gap between the inner circle and the out, seelie and unseelie, nature and iron, us and them." So it sounds like this. "Bin isa lu ginst re lusar nila re pure morga ta re wind, sili ta nasili, shela ta tristel, isa ta us."
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah. But
Sounds
there's so many long descriptions of like what ogres do versus trolls versus, pixies in this written version, which we have
yeah.
full translations of. And Nim's description of how that works is really cool on Instagram if you want to check it out.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So Sealy, I heard in there is unsealy or
Yeah, nasili.
not Sealy. Okay.
Yeah, sili ta nasili. Oh, nasili. Right. But in English, it's unseelie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Any other fictional languages you want to mention? Maybe Kryptonian, since that comes up a lot, right?
Yeah, I talk about Kryptonian. I'm very well known for Kryptonian. So that was for Man of Steel. It was not spoken in the film, but it was part of the art department. So again, I worked mostly with graphic designers. One in particular named Kirsten Franson out of Vancouver, and they filmed the Kryptonian portion in Vancouver, and I'm very close to there, which is how I got involved as well. And yeah, the Kryptonian writing system is a syllabic writing system. So consonant and vowels of the words that were developed in this sound system of Kryptonian, which was the base to all the writing, are marked kind of like Japanese hiragana or katakana. And so there's the symbols, like the S means it's a language issue. The fact that Superman has an S on his chest and he's an alien, doesn't make any sense. So the designers made it be, this is the word in my world. I think his line is, on my world, this means hope or something. He explains to Lois Lane in the film. And then it's also like for Kal-El and Jor-El, it's their symbol. So in the Flash that just came out, I also worked on the Flash to help translate Kara, the Supergirl's costume. So the S is the same, but the quote that's written underneath it is different than Superman's. So I worked on translating that as well. And that's in that syllabic writing system. So there's these glyphs that we call them that kind of mark, like Zod had his own, and then the House of El has their own. And then it was a marketing device as well that people could get their glyphs for their house and what that meant about their personalities. And then we'd write out their names. It was a website. You could do a little quiz and get your name in Kryptonian early on. Yeah,
that's cool.
Sadly, it disappeared, sadly. I was hoping that website's probably on the dark lost web or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I missed out on that. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how might someone get into conlang if they're interested?
Yeah. So there's a great group called the Language Creation Society, which David Peterson might have spoken about. He was one of the co-founders of this, and it is global now. And they are like a nonprofit, I believe, that are people who are interested in constructed languages. So that is how David got his job on Game of Thrones, was that there was the production company reached out to the Language Creation Society, and they had a competition where people submitted portfolios for Dothraki, and then David's was selected. And there are often calls for, an author's writing a fantasy novel and needs a fairy language or a troll language or whatever it is. So there are often job opportunities that come up in different scales through there, but they also have amazing resources, a giant archive called Fiat Lingua of articles all about people who've conlanged for 30 years and what they do. They have conferences. They have suggestions on books to look at. David Peterson's book, The Art of Language Invention, being one of them. Mark Rosenfelder's Language Creation Kit is another. So they give you tips on how to conlang. So I would definitely recommend checking out the Language Creation Society.
Interesting.
Awesome. All right. Well, been a fantastic conversation. Love hearing about these different languages. Always fascinating because it helps with the immersion of the story world so much, I think.
Yes, very true. And I really, well, it keeps me in business, but I mean, it's my side job. I'm a university professor and I will probably never quit. But I really love that more and more productions are taking this on and adding languages. So it makes that world experience and the immersion, like you said, more real for fans, and fans can learn the languages and get that other piece of their item that they are in love with,
Mm-hmm. Is there anywhere someone can find? I don't know if you have a website or not.
I do.
You're awesome. Where's that
So
at?
it's my name, christineschreyer.ca. And yeah, it's got my academic research on there, but also my conlang stuff, although it's a little behind. I need to add Rebel Moon and Spiderwick Chronicles. They came out right in final exam season, and so I'm a bit behind putting stuff up about them. But yeah, or I am still on X at _C Schreyer, my last name.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Britton Watkins, the director of Conlanging, the documentary, and producer on this indie sci-fi film Sen. Aingal sets derom fmalnit alu genretainment, and you're listening to Genretainment.
Thanks so much for being on the show, Christine. We hope everyone will check out your work on the various TV shows and movies, and maybe spark some interest in languages in some genre geeks out there. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know.
I think that's a wrap for today's episode.
Until next time.
monkey.